Welcome to online class for radiographers and students organized by ISRT Thrissur Academic Club. Anatomy for radiographers Part 1. Anatomical planes: mid-sagittal plane, transverse plane, coronal or frontal plane, horizontal plane, oblique plane. The first one, mid-sagittal plane, divides the body into right and left halves. Second one is sagittal plane. Any plane parallel to median plane, that is sagittal plane. Transverse plane, a plane at right angles to the vertical plane or at right angles to the longitudinal axis of any part. The fourth one, coronal or frontal plane, a vertical plane at right angles to the median plane. Horizontal plane, a plane parallel to the horizon or ground. Oblique plane, any plane other than forementioned planes that are known as oblique plane. Then we are going to discuss about the terms used in relation of anatomy. There are 6 relations mainly: anterior or ventral, posterior, superior, inferior, medial, and lateral. So what is anterior or ventral? That means it's closer to front. Then what's posterior? Towards the back. What's superior? Towards the head. What's inferior? Close to feet. What's medial? Near to median plane. What's lateral? Away from median plane. Then other terms: proximal, distal, flexor surface, superficial, deep, ipsilateral, contralateral. First one, proximal. It's used to describe a part that is closer to the trunk of the body or closer to another specified point of reference than another part. For example, the elbow is proximal to the wrist. Second one is distal. It means that a particular body part is further from the trunk or further from another specified point of reference than another part. For example, fingers are distal to the wrist. The third one, flexor surface. Anterior surface in upper limb and posterior surface in lower limb, that are known as flexor surface. The fourth one, superficial, means situated near the surface. Peripheral also means outward or near the surface. The fifth one, deep. It is used to describe the parts that are more internal. What's ipsilateral? The same side. For example, the spleen and the descending colon are ipsilateral. That means they are same side. They are on same side. The last one, the contralateral. It refers to the opposite side. For example, the spleen and the gallbladder. The spleen and the GB are contralateral. Then we are going to the term regional terms. 2 types. The whole body can be divided in 2 types. First one is axial part, second one is appendicular part. What's the difference? Axial part includes the head, neck, and trunk. In the case of appendicular part, they includes the limbs which are attached to the body axis. So axial part includes the head, neck, and trunk. At the same time, the appendicular part includes the limbs which are attached to the body axis. Then, terms used for movements: flexion and extension. Approximation of flexor surface whereby the angle of joint is reduced. The main thing is there, if the angle of joint is reducing in flexion, the angle of joint is increasing in case of extension. So it's very easy to remember: flexion, angle of joint is reducing; extension, angle of joint is increasing. The two examples are given in the pictures. Then other two terms, adduction and abduction. What are that? Movements towards the median plane, that is adduction. Movements away from median plane, that is abduction. So remember, movements, any movements towards the median plane is adduction. Away from median plane, that is abduction. The other two terms, median rotation, lateral rotation. It's also easy to remember. Median rotation to the median side, inward rotation. Well, then what is lateral rotation? That is outward rotation. Next one is circumduction. Various combinations of foregoing movements that are known as circumductions. There is nothing to confuse. Various combinations of foregoing movements that are together known as circumduction. See the examples of hand and foot. Next is rotation. That is very familiar for us. Rotation can occur within the vertebral column, at a pivot joint, or in a ball and socket joint. Next one is pronation and supination. Pronation functions to rotate the limb toward the inside, as when the hand is turned, so the palm is facing downward. Once more, the hand is turned, so the palm is facing downwards. That is pronation. Supination is just opposite of pronation. In supination, the muscle causes the limb to rotate towards the outside. For instance, so then the palm is facing upwards. It is very, very easy to understand. Next one is dorsiflexion and plantar flexion. First of all, we have to look at the image. The image is illustrating the idea of dorsiflexion and plantar flexion more clearly. There are the movements at the ankle joint. We know the ankle joint is a hinge joint. Lifting the front of the foot so that the top of the foot moves towards the anterior leg is dorsiflexion. The top of the foot moves toward the anterior leg is dorsiflexion. Then what is plantar flexion? Lifting the heel of the foot from the ground or pointing the toes downward is plantar flexion. Lifting the heel of the foot from the ground or pointing the toes downward is plantar flexion. The thing we have to remember is these are the only movements available at ankle joint: dorsiflexion and plantar flexion. Then the next is inversion and eversion. Inversion and eversion are very complex movements that involve a multiple plane joints among the tarsal bones of the posterior foot. that are intertarsal joints, and thus are not motions that take place at angle joint. But what is inversion? It is a turning of the foot to angle the bottom of the foot towards the midline, while eversion turns the bottom of the foot away from the midline. Inversion angle the bottom of the foot toward the midline. Eversion foot away from the midline. The foot has a greater range of inversion and eversion motion. These are important motions that help to stabilize the foot when walking or running on an uneven surface and aid in the quick side-to-side changes in direction used during active sports such as basketball, racquetball, or soccer. Then protraction and retraction. They are anterior-posterior movements of the scapula or mandible. Anterior-posterior movements of the scapula or mandible that are known as protraction or retraction. Retraction of the scapula occurs when the shoulder is moved forward, as when pushing against something or throwing a ball. Retraction is the opposite motion, with the scapula being pulled posteriorly when medially toward the vertebral column. For the mandible, protraction occurs when the lower jaw is pushed forward to stick out the chin, while retraction pulls the lower jaw back. Next one is depression and elevation. There are downward and upward movements of the scapula and the mandible. The upward movement of scapula and shoulder is elevation and the downward movement is depression. These movements are used to stretch your shoulders. Similarly, elevation of the mandible is the upward movement of the lower jaw used to close the mouth or bite on something. And depression is downward movement that produces the opening of mouth. Next one is excursion. Excursion is the side-to-side movement of mandible. Lateral excursion moves the mandible away from the midline, toward or either right or left side. Then medial excursion returns the mandible to its resting position at midline. Next one is opposition and reposition. Opposition of thumb, movement that bring the tip of the thumb in contact with the tip of a finger. This movement is produced at the first carpometacarpal joint, which is a saddle joint formed between the trapezium carpal bone and the first metacarpal bone. Thumb opposition is produced by a combination of flexion and abduction of the thumb at the joint. Returning the thumb to its anatomical position next to the index finger is called reposition. We know anatomy is a very vast topic. We cannot complete it by one episode. It's just a basics. We want to explore more and more in the anatomy. So see you again with episode 2. This module is prepared by ISRT Thrissur Academic Club under Project Umbrella. Thank you.